Game Boy Advance was the home for ports and remakes of games for the 16-bit era. I mean, I covered Sonic Genesis last time as an example. But what about games for, let's say, the previous generation, more specifically, the Nintendo Entertainment System? While games for this gray VCR-looking thing did have their spotlight on the previous portable system for Nintendo, the Game Boy Color, they were not often as good as the originals due to the hardware. But this all changes with the introduction of a specific series of games released in 2003 to celebrate the 20th anniversary of the Family Computer, aka the Famicom, and the Nintendo Entertainment System. Introducing the classic NES Series, or the Famicom Mini Series, for the Game Boy Advance. Consisting of 12 games, 30 in Japan, each game was recreated from scratch, and even had some new additions to some games. But does this series of games hold up today, and how do they complement their originals in the newer portable 32-bit system? Well, let's start with the first game released in the chronological order, and find out. Before we start though, I want to clarify that the classic NES series, which is what I'm going to be looking at, we'll save the Famicom Mini Series and those other games for another day, were released in multiple parts, specifically 2. Series 1 consisting of the first 8 games, while Series 2 consists of the other 4. So, I'm going to be looking at those games in chronological order of their release, starting with Donkey Kong. Straight port of the NES game, but as you can see, the graphics are kind of deformed due to the GBA screen resolution, so sprites had to have a few lines removed. But besides that, it's the NES version of Donkey Kong. Plus, you can actually save your high score, which you couldn't do in the original version, so that's cool. Game number 2, Ice Climber. Control Popo and Nana as they try to scale a mountain and try to find and eat some vegetables. Besides that, it's, again, Ice Climber, which means it's not that good. Ice Climber is such a meh game for me. I mean, I do like the concept of it and the gameplay isn't that bad, but it just feels so goddamn stiff, and the kind of bad control isn't really fixed in this version. This is probably also a good time to bring up that some of these games were already released for the Game Boy Advance e-reader, alongside a few others like Balloon Fight and the original Mario Brothers. This kind of, in turn, made the classic NES series a hard sell when it initially released back in 2003-2004, because, well, why would you want to pay $20 NSRP for a game that released over about 2 decades ago at that point when you could just get it for $5 in card form? Well, you can get about 3 or 4 of them. But I digress. Anyway, game number 3, Excite Bike. Not a bad game for the time, the whole game is here, alongside the Track Raider. But why Excite Bike of all games? They could have went with like Adventure Island, or Ghosts and Goblins, or Twinbee, or, you know, any of the other games that was released in the Japanese set. Game 4, Pac-Man. Again, such an odd choice. Pac-Man is no doubt iconic, and a good game for the system. However, Pac-Man was already released in the Pac-Man collection, which was sold for the same price at the time, and it had 3 other games included with it. I also like to point out that it's kind of funny that the sprites are almost the same size as the original, but the maze kind of shrunk. I don't know, I just thought it was funny. Our 5th game here is Bomberman, and honestly, it's a good pick for the classic NES series. The original Bomberman isn't the best game in the series, but it's still a fun time even if I'm not that good at it. Halfway there, game number 6, Xevious. The arcade shmup makes its way to the GBA through the easier but still fun NES version. I actually like this game, and this was my first time playing it in general. It can be a little hectic with enemies, but it's still an enjoyable experience, and I think you should try to check it out. Game number 7, The Legend of Zelda. This one's a little disappointing as nothing was really fixed except for the translation of the story on the title screen. They maybe could have scaled down the number of enemies in the latter half of the game or fixed some of the clues in the dungeons, but they didn't. I don't really like the first Zelda game as it was, and it was just fixing a messy plot at the beginning that doesn't fix anything in the long run. Our last game in the first wave is Super Mario Brothers. Again, for the 8th time, it's all here in this compressed state. Everything from the original is here and accounted for, even the Minus World glitch. The original Super Mario Brothers is iconic and definitely a game I think everyone should experience at least one point in their lives, but comparing this to the re-released Super Mario Brothers Deluxe for the Game Boy Color, it feels kinda lackluster. Deluxe had a bunch of extras and options for the original game and even included lost levels as an unlockable, but in the classic NES series version, it doesn't have the screen crunch, so it's really a toss-up between which version is more fun to play. Super Mario Bros. Is a game I don't really think has aged gracefully. If anything, replayed it again and again shows how much I really don't like about it compared to the other games like 3 or New Super Mario Bros. DS. It can get repetitive, but it's also something I kind of like about it. It's just a fun game to boot up every once in a while and complete. Anywho, but let's get back to the video. And we're done with the first wave of games for the classic NES series. Overall, not too bad of choices. But let's see what the second wave consists of. Alright, so Wave 2 only has 4 games, but let's be fair and look at them to see if they're really worthy of being here or not. Let's see if they went for quality over quantity. Game 9, Dr. Mario. Another Pac-Man situation. The game itself is fine and good, but was already on the system. In this case, it was Dr. Mario and Puzzle League. Again, another hard sell. I also noticed that Dr. Mario's sprite is actually different and not the same as it was in the original. That's weird. Numero Diaz, Metroid. The version here is actually already better than the original in one way. The game can actually save. In the original, once you died, you got a password and were sent back all the way to the starting area. But in this version, it auto-saves the password for you and continues where you left off with all your ammo and health restored. But there's only one problem with the Metroid being here. It was already on the GBA. Twice. It was remade in the form of Metroid Zero Mission, which I already consider a better game by a long shot. Seriously, if you haven't played the original Metroid, play Zero Mission. It's the quintessential version of Metroid. And the NES version was actually an unlockable in it. But I will say, graphically, the classic NES Series version is the better option of the two. Our second to last game, Castlevania. Now this is a good choice for the series. The GBA wasn't lacking when it came to Castlevania, but this was a good game to have as part of that. The original game is certainly frustrating, but still a classic and fun to this day. Though there's no save feature in this one, which it could have used because, remember, this game is difficult, but it's not the end of the world. And our last game in the classic NES series, Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link. I can go on about how much I actually really enjoyed this game and why I love it, especially compared to Zelda 1 any day of the month. And this is a faithful version of it. By the way, if you haven't already, check out Zelda 2 and give it a real chance, because it's a real fun game, even now. Well, that's every game in the classic NES series. Not a bad selection of games, but a few are questionable choices. But there are a few more things I want to talk about, such as multiplayer, for example. You only need one copy to play multiplayer, and it's easy and straightforward to set up. You need 2 Game Boy Advances and a link cable, or the wireless adapter if you're into that. Turn on the game on 1 and press L and R. This will bring up a screen with a list of options. This screen appears in every game in the series, but for Super Mario Bros. Or any game that supports multiplayer, go down and select Link Play. Connect a link cable from your GBA to another GBA and turn it on. On the first GBA, press Start, and when it recognizes the other console has been plugged in, and the game will boot up on the other system. And from there, it's like the normal NES game, where you just take turns, or you go against each other if you're playing Dr. Mario. Now let's talk about some bonus stuff. Remember the screen I just brought up? Well, here's where you can actually save high scores, put the system in sleep mode, reset if you're into that. The classic NES series cartridges are also hiding a fun Easter egg in plain sight. The color of the cartridges are actually a lighter gray than the normal GBA games, but that's because they're actually the color of the original NES cartridges. The Famicom miniseries even goes a step further, and the boxes are the original Famicom games that are recreated to fit the GBA carts, and those are actually put into newer style packaging that held the manual. The cartridges now also had this color scheme of the Famicom itself being red and white now. Disc system games that were re-released went another step further and were yellow like the original FDS discs. There were also NES and Famicom themed GBA SPs that were released in US, Europe, and Japan respectively. And that's it for the classic NES series. In conclusion, there's not much of a reason to really go back and play them now, especially because you have other ways to play them, including the 3DS Virtual Console, the NES Classic Edition, and Nintendo Switch Online. Well, they're fun little novelties and interesting to go back on. So, what's the final verdict for the NES Classic series? Oh yeah, forgot. Here's something new I'm doing for this series. A final verdict scale. On a scale of 1 to 10, 1 meaning you should avoid these games at all costs, and 10 meaning you should probably replace the originals with them. So, what do I give the classic NES series? Well, I give it a 6 out of 10. The games play good and there are some solid titles here, but the questionable games here. The graphics being downgraded and lack of anything new to the games themselves really brings it down though. They are good, but you don't have much of a reason to go back to them. They're novelties, and that's really all they are nowadays. But, again, if you're really interested, I recommend checking them out. I promise you won't waste any time. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all on the flip side.